All right, guys, a quick review on long-run adjustments and sticky prices. So what we're looking at here is how to explain and understand the long-run adjustment, because they talk about this a lot in different FRQ questions. If the government stays out of a situation, how will the long-run adjustment occur? What will happen in the long run? So what they're looking at is how an initial decline in aggregate demand that leads to a recessionary gap. We're at a point lower than full employment here, an output level lower than full employment. How does this automatically adjust back to potential GDP? How do we get back to full employment without the government, without the Federal Reserve doing anything? And we're going to see this short-run aggregate supply curve shift to the right and bring us back to potential GDP. So we're going to kind of walk through that process here. Now, these types of questions, the wording is always really similar. And this is wording pulled from the last 4 years. 3 out of the last 4 years had questions, number one questions, that had one section asking about the long run adjustment. Okay? So some of the common similarities that we see is the concept of no policy action. They're specifically stating that the Federal Reserve or central bank and the government is not engaging in any fiscal or monetary policy action. They're doing nothing. They're just allowing it to adjust on its own. The other thing that we're seeing in these questions is the long run adjustment. All right. So it's always in the long run. How does this occur? It's not a short run adjustment. It's a long run adjustment. In the short run, we see sticky prices. They don't quite adjust. Now, each one of these questions has you do one of two things with it. It's either having you explain how this takes place, or it's having you show through a model. Now, on the 2020 AP exam, we know we're not going to be drawing models, but understanding how to explain it is vital to getting this part of the question right. So understanding how the model works is pretty much essential to getting the explanation right as well. All right, one thing you need to understand is the difference between long and short run. Now, long run is a period in which everything is flexible. All the wages, all the prices, everything has time to adjust to the full state of the economy. In the long run, because everything will automatically adjust, unemployment is at the natural rate. It's 4 to 6%. We are always at full employment in the long run. And GDP is going to be at potential GDP, or real GDP is going to be at potential. These things are always true in the long run. So let's run through the process here. We start with a recessionary gap. We have this decline in aggregate demand that drops price level and brings real GDP lower than potential. It puts us in this recessionary gap. Now, we usually would see a drop in wages because we're seeing cyclical unemployment and we're seeing an unemployment rate greater than 6%. So obviously the demand for labor is going to be a little bit lower here. So if we jump to the labor market, and this is a model that's not a macro model, it's a micro model. It's part of the factor market unit. And a labor market is just like anything else. It determines the price of a worker, the price of, labor. So its wages is your price. In this case, we should see in a recession the decline in demand and the lower wages. Now, most prices can adjust relatively quickly. When it comes to wages and other inputs, we refer to them as sticky because they don't quite adjust as quickly as everything else. Now, in this case, we should see wages drop, but we don't quite see that yet. Now, the short run is the time period we're dealing with initially. Now, the difference between long and short really isn't about a 6-month, 4-month, 2-month time period, 10 years for that matter. It's when everything has the time to adjust. So it could be a few weeks, it could be a few years, it could be a few decades, depending upon how quickly things adjust to the state of the economy. In the short run, everything doesn't adjust. In the long run, it does. All right, so in the short run, we see what we call sticky prices. It's slow to adjust to its new equilibrium, and there's a number of reasons for it. Now, sticky prices can also be referred to as price rigidity or nominal rigidity, or we might just call it wage stickiness. It can refer to prices, input prices, but we most commonly refer to it when it comes to wages, one of the bigger inputs in the production, one of the bigger inputs when it comes to shifting the aggregate supply curve. Why are these prices sticky? For wages, one of the big things that keep them sticky is contracts. All right, if I have a contract and they're paying me X amount of dollars per year and all of a sudden they come up and say, we're gonna have to drop you down 20% this next month. I have a contract, legal contract that says I'm going to get paid this. They can't necessarily do that quickly. And as an individual contract, it's one thing. When we're talking about labor unions and the big labor contracts that are signed, that's a whole nother level of difficulty to get those changed. So contracts kind of bind employers to a certain wage. We also have what we call efficiency wages. Now, efficiency wages are wages that are above the market equilibrium, the market wage, that ensure that employees are staying at their place of work. So an employer knows that it's going to be costly to go through a background check on somebody to train a new employee. So they pay them over the market price just to maintain them there. Now, if we go into a recession and wages should be dropping, the employer might know that it's going to be more expensive to fire this guy and bring him back later. And if they think it's going to be a short recession, they might keep him around at that wage. So efficiency wages are another thing. Now, when it comes to prices in general, one of the causes of price rigidity is going to be what we call menu prices. Now, this is specific to the restaurant business, but it can apply to other things as well. Now, imagine you own a restaurant and all your menus are printed up. You have all these specific prices. And all of a sudden, let's say the price of butter changes, or the price of bread changes. So that's going to impact a lot of different menus or items on your menu. But because you have to print up these menus, because there is a cost associated with printing new menus, you don't automatically change all your prices. You might deal with that price for a while, so it becomes kind of sticky. It doesn't change as quickly as it should. If you had a digital menu, you could easily just change those prices all the time, unless you're worried about customers. So sometimes there's reasons why these prices are sticky. All right, now let's talk about the long run adjustment here. We are in a recessionary gap. We had sticky wages to begin with, but in the long run, we start to see these wages drop down. People who are unemployed are willing to come back at lower wages, or people that are afraid of being laid off are able to accept these wages. Contracts expire and new contracts are established. So these wages start to drop. As these wages drop, the cost of production starts to drop, and we start to see aggregate supply shift back to the right. As aggregate supply shifts back to the right, we see a lower price level, and we start to see real GDP get back to potential. We're getting back to full employment. The only thing that's changed here is the price level. We went from a higher price level to a lower price level through that automatic adjustment process. The government did not intervene. The Federal Reserve did not pass any monetary policy. We've stayed the course and just allowed it to adjust on its own. Now, we don't do this too much in reality anymore. We're always trying to fix things, through stimulus packages and dropping interest rates and things like that, like it's going on right now in the economy. But it can adjust on its own. It's just that we don't know how long the long run actually is. All right, now this can also happen the other way, in an inflationary gap. Let's imagine that we see an increase in demand across the board, aggregate demand shifts to the right, we have a higher price level and a higher real GDP. Now, we should see wages jump up, but we don't see them go that quickly because employers are, bound by contracts, and although prices aren't as sticky up as they are down, there is still some stickiness there. Employers aren't just going to say, all right, you deserve a higher wage just because. Or, they might do it to keep them, but they're not going to do it just out of the blue. So we do see a period where it's more beneficial for producers to produce more. And as long as those wages stay low, they're going to keep doing it. Now, those sticky wages keep that in place temporarily. But eventually, as those wages start to increase because people are like, hey, prices are up, I need to make more money, they start requesting, employers start paying a little bit more, the cost of production increases when those wages do. And we start to see aggregate supply shift back to the left and create a new equilibrium. We have price level up now, but we are back to potential GDP. So real GDP is at potential. We are back to full employment. Unemployment rate's 4 to 6%. Again, no cyclical unemployment. Everything is good at this point. We're back to equilibrium. So that's the long run adjustment from an inflationary gap. Eventually, wages go up, aggregate supply shifts to the left, and we're back to equilibrium again. So check out the practice video. Make sure you're grabbing that worksheet from the description below. Give that a shot and go over the answers with me to see how well you did. In addition to the practice sheet, I should have a video up tomorrow about the FRQ from 2019. It's from the Set 2, question number 1. It's a long question, but it does have a portion that deals with the auto adjustment. So I'd like you to give this one a shot as well and see how well you can do it, and we'll go through it together. All right, I'll see you guys next time.